Hello. Yes. Yes, it is me coming from the afterlife. Yes, I'm dead. I'm in heaven now. All right. Page 1000. I'll just read the last bit in the last page because I don't remember what's going on. Man must live, of course, and children must be born of women. But was there not something else, something more important than any conceivable organization for these great necessary ends? A doubt came to Paul Trent's mind, different from any he had ever felt, as to whether his inmost ideal, this thing that corresponded to the world's word liberty, was enough to live by. Wasn't it not only the gap, the space, the vacuum, the hollow and empty no man's land into which the fleeting nameless essence could flow and abide? He felt as if he were on the edge of some thrilling secret, as this thought, this doubt, touched him with his breath. It was as if all the moments of dark, cool, lovely, quiet emptiness that had come to the generations of men living in Glastonbury had incarnated themselves in the feminine emanation of this place, which now seemed brushing him with its overshadowing wings. I wasn't paying attention to that, but that's okay. I can play these any time, and so can you, to see what you missed. Comrade Spear wanted to liquidate the Grail quest on behalf of communism. Red Robinson wanted to destroy it because of the treacheries and oppressions it had condoned. He himself had wanted to shake it off as a morbid medieval superstition, hurtful to free spirits, like a clammy miasma. And all this while old Garrett was working his miracles by its aid, but casually, carelessly, almost indifferently, as if he had discovered that the whole Grail quest were a mere byproduct of some vast planetary reservoir of an unknown force. Oh dear, his thoughts had become too analytical, too concrete, and his good moment was gone. With a shrug of his shoulders, he turned the handle, entered the tribunal, and ran upstairs to the orderly room from which Glastonbury was now ruled. Page break, paragraph break. When Mr. Evans arrived at his shop after his interview with Miss Crow by the railings of the cattle market, he found his partner, Mr. Jones, extremely excited by the quantity of foreigners there were that day in the town, and bent upon devoting the whole day to a lively concentration upon their business. I know better than thee can know what these continentals require, seeing as I've lived in Glaston afore thee was born, persisted the old man. And the best thing they can do is to bring up a pile of they books at a basement and put 'em in windy. Them Germans and Russians be more for books than they be for bricky-back. Mr. Evans struggled out of his tight overcoat, making pretentious grimaces as he pulled at its sleeve, hung it up on a nail at the back of the shop, and rubbing his face with both his hands, prepared to do what his partner bade him. He had taken good care since his marriage to avoid that descent into his avernus, but the human mind is so constructed that when he received this point-blank push from his business confederate, 100 reasons sprang up like 100 sly lawyers, each of them full of subtle arguments why he should do what the old man bade him to do. This was the third little breeze that had helped forward that day his Gulf Stream of evil. Of doom! Of evil. His high spirits that morning had been largely due to the fact that he had just arrived in his Life of Merlin, capital L, capital M, at the beginning of the final scene where the magician passes into the state of being hinted at in the mysterious word Esplumiar. Mr. Evans had been writing of late, every evening in their small sitting room in the Edmonds Hill district above Bovetown. He would sit on a little chair that creaked under his bony figure in front of the flimsy table covered with publications of various antiquarian and folklore societies, and as he stared at a cheap colored print in a variegated frame of a river and a boat and a woman reading, a print that took the heart out of all rivers and all boats and all women, he would give himself up to the exquisite and sweet pain of weighing every word he was writing, changing it, resettling it, substituting another, replacing the first, till the particular sort of rhythm he aimed at had at last been caught. A boat, a river, a woman reading, this incredible feeble production, in which the blotchy frame and the sentimental picture seemed to melt into each other till they became a weak blur of meaningless twists and curves, had grown on to be so dear, so sweet, so familiar to Mr. Evans, whose aesthetic taste was nil, that it now only reminded him of a picture in his parents' farms, but it also associated itself with the word esplumior. It was under that spell of this entirely worthless, but to him almost sacred object, that Mr. Evans was now considering and weighing in his mind two simple sentences. And so in the wet vapor that hung in woeful water drops upon his beard, he bowed himself down and stooped right low over the rain-soaked earth where yesterday had been the drawbridge of Care City. The dolorous blow had fallen. The spear of Longinus had done its work. Where was he now to hide his forehead and cover his eyelids? Who knew too well the causes of all these happenings, their echoes, their ripples, their waxing and waning moons? Pleased with the way these paragraphs sounded in his mind, and finding in his broodings of the word esplumior a strange vibration of peace, Mr. Evans had emerged from his threshold that morning, but now all was different. As he traversed a little dark staircase from shop to cellar, and from cellar to shop, carrying many enormous armfuls of books, he found his mood of dreamy satisfaction. That's not. Can't. I'm having a mind blur right now. Satisfaction. Come on. Changed into something else. Number 2 was scrupulously honest in his handling of the diurnal gains, which, with the increase of foreign visitors, began to grow very considerably. He kept 2 large collecting boxes, one of them with the letters GC, Glastonbury Commune, written in pencil on it, and he divided all their increments into 2 portions and then subdivided their own share. During the time that Mr. Evans was bringing up these books, the shop was crowded with people, and old Jones and all he could do to deal with the pushing and jolting that was taking place. Old Jones had all he could do to deal with the pushing and jostling that was going on in this place. But he was right about the books. Not a German, not a Russian entered, but he began turning over the pages of these books, while not a Frenchman came in, but he wanted to see all the china ornaments that the establishment boasted. Okay. This learned interest in their stocks of books, most of which were old parchment folios, kept Mr. Evans at his job, but his mood had completely changed. And in a most subtle way, it had changed. Oh, and in a most subtle way, it had changed. Wait, I'm going to read this again. But his mood had completely changed, and in a most subtle way, it had changed. Okay? For while his broodings were still upon his mystical interpretation of the word esplumior, there slipped into his thoughts a certain episodes in the earlier life of his magician, which led insensibly to his subterranean temptation. He recalled, for instance, that occasion when Merlin came rushing down in a howling storm from the forest hills, driving before him a herd of stags, himself riding upon the back of the hindmost, and rending off one of its great horns, flung this wild weapon at the daring chieftain who was stealing the magician's wife. Oh, I need more coffee. The dark and bloody violence of this scene disturbed the current of Mr. Evans's mind. Something in its sinister action of tearing out that branched horn by its roots reminded him of a deadly, a most perilous passage in the unpardonable sin. The evil tide was indeed full upon him now. With trembling knees he put down his candle, for little daylight could enter that cellar, and snatching the book from its place by St. Augustine, he began feverishly turning its pages till he found that abominable and terrible passage. His hands shook so much, and his knees knocked together so violently, as he gloated over this dreadful scene, that anyone beholding him would have supposed him to be the victim of St. Vitus's dance. The man's bones seemed to melt within him as he read on and on now, passing from this passage to another and from that to the another, till all sense of place or time was completely lost. The long winter months in which he had lived so happily with Cordelia fell away from him like a cinematograph's, you know what I mean, picture passing across an artificial screen. Nothing in the world seemed to matter. Nothing in the world seemed in the least importance compared with the overpowering mania that repossessed him now. It returned upon him with all the more irresistible power because of his long suppression of it. Had anyone been down there watching his face, they would have seen that he was biting his lower lip so violently, sucking it indeed into his mouth as well as biting it, that his whole countenance was transfigured. His nostrils kept twitching, opening and shutting like those of a savage stallion, and his eyes burned with so insane a light that one could fancy that they would actually cause the paper upon which these atrocious things were written to smolder and shrivel like leaves held into a consuming flame. The man's absorption in his frenzied vice was so horribly complete that when the door at the top of the staircase opened and number two's voice called upon him to come up into the shop, it was no more than if he had heard a moth beating against the wall. But a moment came, for even in the throes of a cerebral excitement driven in a pitch like this, a human being grows aware of that calling horizon that we name the future. Those beckoning, fluctuating crossroads, those bridges, Perilous, Pumperless Bridge, Eel Bridge, Sword Bridge, Water Bridge, that make a person feel that wicked thoughts are not enough. A moment came when Mr. Evans resolved to do something. It was no vague thing that he resolved to do, for his imaginative projection was as concrete and palpable as the worst of these silhouettes of horror engraved in the holy excesses of sadistic satisfaction by Dante's rationalized dementia. He now closed the leaves of the book, letting the page that had overpowered him fall down upon its neighbor as delicately as a person might cover up a wound with its own eroded skin. Well, that's a good place to stop, with eroded skin on a wound. Till next time, I'll see you in heaven. Goodbye.